The auction starts at 9:00 a.m. and you almost don't go. That's the part that stays with you later, not the number, not the moment the math finally resolves into something you can't argue with, but the specific Tuesday morning when you almost didn't get out of bed. The alarm went off at 6:47. You had driven 40 minutes to one of these before and walked away with a unit full of broken furniture and a box of someone's old tax returns, and a feeling that the whole thing was theater designed to make regular people feel like they were one auction away from a different life. You lay there for 4 minutes with the alarm off, deciding whether the 40-minute drive was worth it. You got up. Not because of intuition, not because something told you this one was different. Just because you were already awake and the coffee was going to take 12 minutes either way. This is how it actually starts, not with a vision, with a Tuesday and a cup of coffee and a decision that costs you nothing except the willingness to not go back to sleep. You've been doing storage unit auctions for 2 years at this point, which is long enough to have a system and short enough to still make mistakes inside it. The system is simple, almost embarrassingly simple, which is part of why it works. You show up early. You watch which other bidders show up early. You look at the unit from the doorway, never inside because you're not allowed inside, and also because the doorway tells you most of what you need to know if you've been doing this long enough to read it. You bid against your own ceiling, not against the other bidders. The moment you start bidding against a person instead of a number, you've already lost something even if you win the unit. The facility is on the edge of an industrial corridor outside the city, not glamorous, which is true of every storage facility that has ever been worth anything. Glamour is not a feature of this business. The units are concrete and metal and fluorescent, and they smell like time. There are 11 units up for auction today. You've driven past this facility 100 times without stopping. You stopped today because the listing mentioned unit sizes ranging up to 20x30, and because the facility is in a zip code that skews older, higher income, the kind of neighborhood where people store things they intend to retrieve and then don't, for reasons that usually involve estate complications or relocation or the specific human tendency to keep paying a monthly fee because canceling requires a decision, and the decision keeps getting deferred. You look at the first 4 units. Nothing. Not nothing as in worthless, just nothing as in the math doesn't work at any price that would win the bid. Broken appliances, particle board furniture, the accumulated residue of lives that were being stored rather than lived. You step back from each one and let the other bidders do what they're going to do. Unit 7 is different. You know it from the doorway in about 45 seconds, which is not long but is long enough when you've been doing this correctly. The unit is a 20x30, climate controlled, which cost the original renter more per month, which means they valued what was inside. The contents are organized, not just stored, organized. Labeled plastic bins stacked with a logic that suggests the person who packed them intended to come back. A rolling wardrobe rack with garment bags. What appears to be a set of matching luggage, the real kind, not the department store kind. 2 large wooden crates in the back, the kind built for shipping, the kind that suggests contents that warranted protection during transport. A rolled oriental rug standing upright against the left wall, large, easily 12 feet. And in the far right corner, partially obscured by a canvas tarp, the corner of what appears to be a frame. A gilded frame, the kind that doesn't come from a furniture chain. You take all of this in from the doorway in 45 seconds, and then you take one step back and look at the ceiling the way you do when you're running numbers, and you don't want your face to say anything the other bidders can read. The bidding opens at $200. You wait. 2 other bidders come in early. One drops at $800. The other, a regular you've seen at 4 of these, goes to $2,400 before glancing at his phone and stepping back in a way that means he's hit his number. You bid $2,600. Nobody counters. The unit is yours for $2,600 and a 40-minute drive, and 4 minutes of lying in bed deciding whether to get up. What happens next is not a montage. It doesn't compress into something clean and satisfying the way it does when people tell this story later, leaving out the 7 hours of physical labor, the dust, the lifted wooden crates, the heat of a July afternoon in a concrete facility with fans that work but only barely. You and a guy named Pat, who helps you on units over a certain size for a flat $200 plus lunch, spend the better part of a day cataloging the contents methodically, which means photographing everything, opening every bin, moving every piece of furniture to check for damage and maker's marks, and any identifying information that helps you figure out what you're actually dealing with. The bins are mostly household goods, some vintage kitchenware, a set of mid-century barware still in original packaging, a collection of approximately 40 art glass pieces Murano by the look of them, the kind that serious collectors pay real money for at the right auction. You photograph everything and set it aside. The luggage is a matched set of 8 pieces, vintage Hartmann, the belting leather kind, monogrammed in near-perfect condition. You know enough to know that's worth something. You don't know exactly how much yet, which is why you photograph it and keep moving. The wardrobe rack holds 12 garment bags. Inside the garment bags are vintage clothing pieces, the kind that stop you mid-reach because the construction is immediately different from anything mass-produced in the last 40 years. You find a label on the third piece you open, and the label is a name you recognize because you've sold enough vintage clothing to know which names matter and which ones are just old. This name matters. You set the garment bags carefully to one side and keep moving. The wooden crates take 2 hours to open properly because you don't want to damage the contents, and because the crates are built seriously, screwed rather than nailed, lined with foam and acid-free paper. The first crate contains 3 framed works oils, small to medium scale, each wrapped individually in glassine. You unwrap the first one carefully and look at it for a long time without touching the surface. The signature is in the lower right corner. You photograph it and move to the second. The signature on the second is different, but the style is related. The third crate, the large one in the corner under the tarp, takes longest. It's a single piece, a large format oil landscape gilded frame as suspected from the doorway. The frame alone is significant. The canvas is in excellent condition. The signature and the date are clear. You sit back on a plastic stool in the middle of a concrete storage unit in July with sweat on your collar and look at what you're looking at. You don't call anyone, not yet. You finish photographing everything. You and Pat load the vehicle carefully, the art pieces last, wrapped and padded, the large canvas horizontal and supported. You drive back deliberately, not fast, because fast doesn't help anything, and the contents of this vehicle have earned a careful 40-minute drive. The first person you call is not a friend and not family. It's an appraiser you've worked with twice before, a woman named Diane who has 30 years in fine art and decorative objects and charges $400 for an initial assessment, and is worth considerably more than that because she tells you the truth without inflating the number to make you feel good about the find. You don't want to feel good, you want to know what you have. Diane comes 3 days later. She spends 4 hours. She doesn't say much while she's working, which you've learned means she's serious, because people who fill silence with commentary while they're appraising are usually performing appraisal rather than doing it. When she finishes, she sits down at your kitchen table with a notepad and a cup of coffee that's gone cold while she was working, and she goes through the list. The Murano glass collection, 43 pieces confirmed, estimated auction range $18,000 to $26,000 depending on the house and the timing. The vintage Hartman luggage, $3,200 to $4,800 for the set at the right vintage market. The clothing pieces from the garment bags, 12 items, 3 of which are significant. Diane names the designer of those 3 and gives you a range that surprises you even though you'd suspected it. Combined estimated value at auction, $34,000 to $51,000 for the 3 significant pieces alone. The mid-century barware still in original packaging, $2,100 to $3,400. Then she gets to the art. The 3 smaller works from the first crate are signed originals, 2 by artists with established auction records, 1 still living with gallery representation in 2 cities. Combined estimated value, $180,000 to $240,000. The large format landscape in the gilded frame she saved for last, which you notice, which means something. She turns the notepad toward you and points to the number she's written there. You look at the number. You look at it the way you looked at the unit from the doorway, carefully, without letting your face do anything you can't control. The number has a range. The low end of the range is $1.4 million. The high end, depending on condition verification, provenance research, and auction house selection, is $3.2 million. You pour yourself a glass of water. You drink it standing at the counter. Diane says the provenance research is going to take time, that there are questions about the chain of ownership that need answering before any major house will accept the consignment, that this is not a fast process, and anyone who tells you it is either doesn't know or isn't telling you the whole truth. You say you understand. You do understand because you've been in this long enough to know that the space between what something is worth and what you actually collect from it is filled entirely with patience and process, and the willingness to do the work correctly rather than quickly. The provenance research takes 4 months. You hire a specialist, which costs $3,800 and is the easiest $3,800 you've ever spent because the alternative is going to a major auction house without documentation and watching the estimate drop by half. The specialist finds the chain of ownership through estate records in 2 states and a gallery sale from 1987, and an insurance appraisal from 2003 that puts a number on the piece that is consistent with what Diane told you at your kitchen table. The consignment process takes another 3 months. You choose the auction house carefully, the same way you chose the unit, from the doorway, looking at the structure before committing to anything. You consign the large landscape and the 2 smaller works with established records to a major house. The 3rd smaller work you place with a regional house that has a stronger collector base for that particular artist's period. The large landscape sells at auction 7 months after you paid $2,600 for the unit. The hammer price is $2.9 million. After the auction house commission, after the specialist fees, after Pat's $200 and the drive and the appraisal and the 7 months of patient process, you net just over $2.5 million from a single canvas. The rest of the unit, the glass, the luggage, the clothing, the barware, the 2 remaining paintings, clears an additional $310,000 across 3 subsequent sales over the following 4 months. Total net across everything, just over $2.8 million. You round it to $4 million when someone asks later, not because you're lying, but because the number includes what the capital itself generated during the 7 months of process, sitting in a high-yield account at 4.7% while the auction house did its work. Nobody asks about the Tuesday morning alarm. Nobody asks about the 4 minutes. Nobody asks about the 40-minute drive or the second storage unit full of broken furniture that came before this one or the system you built slowly and unglamorously over 2 years of auctions that went exactly nowhere. The story people want is the one that starts at the doorway of Unit 7, which is the most interesting part, but is not actually where the story starts. The story starts 2 years earlier with a guy who drove 40 minutes to an auction and came home with broken furniture and someone's old tax returns and didn't quit. It starts with a system built on the unglamorous premise that the opportunity is in the unit nobody else prepared well enough to evaluate correctly. It starts with learning what Murano glass looks like at 30 feet, and what a garment bag from a serious collector feels like in your hands, and what a gilded frame in the back corner of a 20x30 climate-controlled unit suggests about the person who was paying to protect it. The $2,600 bid was not the decision. The decision was every Tuesday before it that looked like nothing. You still go to auctions? Not because you need to, not because the math requires it, because the doorway is still the most honest place you've ever stood. It doesn't know what you're worth. It doesn't care what's already in your account. It just shows you what's there and then it asks whether you prepared well enough to see it. Most people standing at that doorway are looking at a storage unit. You're looking at a question. The answer has always been in whether you got out of bed on a Tuesday when nothing guaranteed it was worth it. It was worth it. It's almost always worth it. You just can't know from the alarm.